And this was just 2 days before the magistrate issued his finding into the death of Timol on the 22nd of June of that year, which exonerated the police from any wrongdoing. Mr. Dutton, I'd like you to have reference to that letter. Your Lordship, we are now dealing with the police file for Mr. Rodriguez. It's marked J1. And the letter in question is on page 77.
Page 77.
Page 77. It is an Afrikaans, and with the court's leave, I'll read the first two paragraphs. My learned colleagues, if I get the translation wrong, are free to correct me.
Yes.
It reads as follows: Dear Mr. Rodriguez, on the occasion of your resignation from the service, I would like to express my deep thanks and appreciation for the dedicated service that you have delivered to the state. Your conduct has been determined as exemplary. The achievement of this distinction is proof that you always served with an unblemished record in a faithful and competent manner. Now, Mr. Dutton, in your affidavit you have expressed surprise at the fact that Mr. Rodriguez was issued with such a letter of commendation. Why have you expressed surprise?
Yes, indeed, I am surprised. Firstly, I would say that in my knowledge, for my entire career in the South African police, it was very seldom that the commissioner actually provided a letter of commendation. If a letter of commendation was provided, it was normally done at a provincial or district level. So that would be the first point. But the second one that I find curious with this is that Mr. Rodriguez joined the SAP on the 9th of February 1956, and on the 27th of June 1956, he was convicted of statutory perjury for contravening Section 9 of Act 16 of 1914 and given a suspended sentence for 5 years, provided he was not again convicted of an offence involving dishonesty.
Mr. Dutton, if we can just pause there. Your Lordship, there are two references to this conviction in his personal file. The first one is on page 83. Where the record is reflected. And firstly, Mr. Dutton, I just want to point out an error in your affidavit where you say it was suspended, a suspended sentence for 5 years provided he wasn't convicted of an offence involving dishonesty. In fact, details of the offence, or rather the sentence, reads as follows, and Your Lordship, I'm going to translate the Afrikaans. He was given, rather his sentence was postponed for 6 months, so long as he does not commit an offence involving dishonesty. What should also be pointed out is that where the nature of the offence is set out, there's the word geskrap, and it looks like 15th of the 1st, 1957. Do you know what is meant by geskrap?
No, I don't, but I think I don't.
Your Lordship, I can advise we are investigating what geskrap means, whether he was subsequently pardoned on that date, whether he perhaps had the sentence or conviction overturned, or whether it was some internal administrative procedure, and once we have concluded our investigations, we shall bring it to the attention of the court. The other reference is on page 85. And Mr. Dutton, can you explain what this document is about and highlight the section dealing with offences?
Yes, this document is an application form by Sergeant Rodriguez for re-enlistment into the South African Police. That's document number 85.
And that's dated, looks like the 28th of October 1975.
That's correct.
And does he disclose any offences?
He discloses a statutera main eet in 1956, Pretoria, and then he writes the words uitgestel and in brackets gekrap.
And my Lord, that appears at the bottom of that page under the heading C or traders or tradings offences. Mr. Dutton, can you also provide other reasons for your surprise that he was issued a letter of commendation?
Yes, I'm just trying to find my place. So, Sergeant Rodriguez did not have a remarkable police career. He was employed in a clerical position in the finance section at headquarters for his entire career. During this period, the SAP 28, which is the leave register, he took a total of 301 days sick leave between the 9th of February 1957 and the 15th of November 1971. And out of these 301 days is included 53 days sick leave in relation to sport-related injury. That's regarded as, those 53 days would be regarded as injuries on duty.
So are you saying the 53 sports injury-related days are separate from the 300 odd days or included?
It's included in the 301 days.
And my Lord, if I could refer the Honourable Court to pages 92 as well as page 17 of the Rodriguez police file, which enumerates the different leave periods. It looks like the most detailed schedule is in fact on page 92. It's on a form titled SAP 28.
And then shall I go ahead?
Please go ahead.
And then my final reason is, my next reason is that Sergeant Rodriguez was the person in the room with Timol when he apparently escaped. And as I said earlier, that's a disciplinary offence. And I'm also surprised because Mr. Rodriguez's personnel file does not disclose that he'd received any letters of recommendation.
Before you move on to letters of recommendation, you seem to be saying that his failure to stop Mr. Timol exiting room 1026 through the window is really something that should be held against him.
Yes, very definitely.
And were you surprised that Mr. Rodriguez ultimately could not stop Mr. Timol exiting the window of 1026?
Yes, I am.
And why?
Well, Mr. Rodriguez was a man of 6 foot tall, and at the time he weighed about in excess of 80 kilograms. He was a sportsman, he played rugby. he did judo, he did wrestling, he did boxing. So, and as we've also heard that Mr. Timol was a small man, weighing I think 60 kilograms and 61 kilograms I think, and
According to the
1.6 in tall.
Yes, according to the post-mortem report, he weighed approximately 65 kilograms in weight, and he was 1 meter 60 centimeters high.
Yes.
My Lord, for the record, the personal file does have medical records for the years 1956 and 1975. In 1975, he was 1 meter 89 centimeters high and weighed 87 kilograms. And that medical history is contained at page 91 of J1, and his 1956 medical history is contained at page 93 of the same document. And according to those records, he was 6 feet high and weighed 142 pounds. The references to his sporting activities, he played rugby, and that can be found between pages 12 and 21. He was also involved in athletics, and that can be seen at page 14. And there are also references to him being involved in karate and boxing. I don't have those particular references right now.
Sorry, not karate, judo.
Okay. Sorry, Mr. Dutton, you were talking about the fact that he wasn't issued with any particular letters of recommendation.
He didn't have any letters of recommendations from his superior officers. He didn't have letters of recommendation or praise from members of the public for extraordinary duties he might have done towards a member of the public. He doesn't have any recorded achievements. He doesn't have any medals for bravery or good service. So in fact, his service record is rather bland and unremarkable. And I question why the Commissioner would have issued a letter to him saying that he had performed his duties in an exemplary way.
So last Tuesday, 18th of July, you say you attended at SAPS headquarters to inspect member files of some 28 former security branch members. And what were remarkable, or rather, what was absent in those files that you found remarkable?
Similar letters of recommendation from the Commissioner.
That there was no letters of commendation from the Commissioner, and this related to 28 active security branch members.
There were no letters of, what's the evidence? Were there or were there no letters?
There was no letter.
There was no
No
letter
similar letter of recommendation.
Commendation.
or commendation on all the 28 files.
On all the 28 files.
Mr. Dutton, what conclusion do you draw from these facts?
Well, the conclusion that I conclude is that he was being commended for his role in the Timol matter. And I say that based also on what Mr. Paul Erasmus said about the letters that he received, where the letters do not specify what they were given for, but the member would know.
And Mr. Dutton, just for the sake of completeness, at pages 78 and 79 of the police file for Rodriguez, there is a certificate of service.
Yes.
Am I correct in saying that that is a pretty standard document that is issued to those who leave the service?
It's a pretty standard document that most members would receive. It's a service record. Again, that service record describes his service as exemplary. I don't think very few members get a recommendation like that.
And few would get a personal letter of commendation from the Commissioner himself?
I can say that I've never heard of it before.
All right, let's turn to the last part of your affidavit, Mr. Dutton. You have already testified and you've set out a large number of steps that you believe the police ought to have taken in the aftermath of Mr. Timol's fall to death. You've testified that virtually none of these basic steps have been taken, and you've also concluded that these lapses are consistent with a cover-up. Are there any other reasons that you might be able to refer the court to why you believe that this particular incident was covered up by the police?
Well, I can only refer to my experience of cover-ups in the security branch on other investigations.
And are you saying that from those experiences and observations that this particular cover-up, the cover-up that you have asserted took place, is consistent with that wider pattern of cover-ups?
Yes, exactly. It doesn't stand by itself.
And in your experience, have you had personal experience of security branch members willing to perjure themselves or misdirect courts?
Yes.
And can you point to some examples?
Well, I can point to the example of Steve Biko, where at the Truth Commission hearings, the security branch members that were involved admitted that they had lied to the inquest. Eugene de Kock at a Truth Commission hearing in July 1999 in Pretoria admitted that he had deliberately misled the Harams Commission. The numerous admissions by SB members before different TRC amnesty committees of deception and cover-ups that they practice to prevent the truth from becoming known. TRC amnesty case 2000/59. The applicants were Johannes Velde van der Merwe, the Commissioner of South African Police, and then and others. And that concerned a case where a man had been the victim of torture, electric shock torture, and he died at John Foster Square on the 10th floor. The Commissioner of Police conspired with the other members to conceal this crime. They arranged for the body to be taken away secretly to Komatipoort, where it was fed to the crocodiles. They then took quite elaborate steps to set up a deception that the man had escaped. So those are a few of the cases. I also have many cases of my personal experience which I investigated and where there were very definite attempts to prevent the investigation from being successful.
And you have mentioned some of those cases in your affidavit, but you also speak about debriefing certain security branch members who were involved with the Vlakplaas operation, and you did so on behalf of the Goldstone Commission. And in so doing, did you also come across attempts by those individuals to cover up past crimes?
Yes, that's correct. There were three individuals, Groot van Heerden, Chappies Kloppers, and Willie Norkeer, were three members of the security branch that worked with Eugene de Kock. And they decided to come over to the Goldstone Commission and disclose what they knew. As a result, they were put on a witness protection program, and myself assisted, or rather, let me put it this way, I assisted in the debriefing of these three men. And State Advocate Pretorius was present. And they disclosed numerous cases of cover-ups, and very serious cover-ups, in murder cases, in torture cases, in cases where perhaps they just didn't like the person anymore. As a result of this information, Eugene de Kock, a colonel in the police force, was eventually convicted. I can't remember whether it was for 30 counts of murder or 60 counts of murder, but it was a significant amount, and many counts. Paul Erasmus, the witness that testified before the court a day or two ago, I also debriefed, or assisted in his debriefing, in Denmark. I think in about 1994. And again, Advocate Pretorius was with us. And Paul Erasmus, as you heard, spoke about many, many cases of cover-ups. And he was in a position where he not only spoke about it, he was able to produce, in most of the incidents, documentary proof. In the cases of Groot van Heerden, Chappies, and Willie Norkeer, what they told us was proven. It was proven against Eugene de Kock.
Thank you, Mr. Dutton. Now, Mr. Dutton, finally, if I can draw your attention to your visit to police headquarters last Tuesday, where you've advised the court that you inspected a large number of documents. Did you have occasion to inspect the police file of one J.Z. van Niekerk?
Yes, I did.
My Lord, for the record, we just handed up this document marked J2. And following your inspection, did you reach the conclusion that there was something in these documents that should be drawn to the attention of this inquest court?
Yes.
My Lord, can I refer you to page...
Just a minute. Oh, yes. Yes. You're on J2, right?
J2, that's correct.
Yeah. Page?
120. The pages of interest are 120 and 122. Perhaps I'll just give a short description of the letter on page 120. It is a confidential letter addressed to, it looks like the District Commissioner in Pietermaritzburg. It comes from the Attorney General, Mr. Harwood, and the letter attaches a dossier. The letter also advises that the Attorney General declines to prosecute or pursue the claims made by one Wilfred Macheke. And these complaints were made against a Captain van Niekerk, a Lieutenant Colonel Skitter, and a Captain Gloy. Mr. Dutton, why are any of those names significant for purposes of this inquest, and if so, why?
Well, firstly, because of the date of the allegations, which was during 1971, and because of the nature of his complaint.
Can we first deal with who the individuals who the complaints were made against are? Captain van Niekerk?
Captain J.Z. van Niekerk is the same person, the same van Niekerk in the Timor matter.
Was he one of the individuals that interrogated Mr. Timol?
Yes, he was.
Captain Gloy?
And Captain Gloy was also an individual that interrogated Timor.
But Lieutenant Colonel Skitter was not implicated in the Timor matter?
That name is not familiar to me.
Okay. My Lord, these names and their force numbers are set out in detail at page 122. And 122 provides a short summary of the complaints made. And at the top right-hand corner, the force number of Captain J.Z. van Niekerk is supplied. That's force number 27394K. And below Skitter's name is Captain J.H. Gloy, and his force number is recorded as 31323P. And then in brackets underneath those names in Afrikaans, reference is made to the fact that all three are members of the South African Police Veiligheidstak, Security Branch, Hoofkantoor headquarters. Mr. Dutton, do you want to draw our attention to what you believe is particularly relevant in the complaint made by Wilfred Macheke?
Yes, it's the nature of the assault that he alleges.
In fact, can I ask you to read to the court the most relevant part of his complaint? Just for the record, he was arrested on the 19th of February 1971. But if you drop 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines down, after he was given breakfast,
Okay.
could you read the next, perhaps 5 or 6 lines?
Without being asked questions, he was struck with a stick on the head. The other hit him with an iron...
Sorry, can you start it? He was given breakfast.
Okay. He was given breakfast. There were 3 European detectives present. Without being asked questions, he was struck with a stick on the head. The other hit him with an iron over the head several blows. He tried to defend himself and received blows on his hands. He was also struck with a stick over the buttocks. The third one choked him at about 2 p.m.
Thank you. I think we can pause there unless there's anything else you wish to highlight. And in your view, why is this of relevance to this inquest?
Because of the evidence of Dr. Holland, who said that a blunt force, and she, I cannot remember if she said in evidence that an iron rod, for example, but she certainly told us that during consultation, could have caused the injury to the top of the head. She also found evidence of strangulation. So I thought it was relevant.
And is there evidence that Captain van Niekerk and Captain Gloy were involved in the interrogation of Timol?
Yes, there is.
No further questions, Your Lordship.
Sorry.
Is there something else?
Yes, I have. The file I inspected at the police, with this one that I've got now, I don't know whether I missed this or whether these documents weren't in the original file that I read. But if you go to page 137, these are further charges against a whole list of security policemen. Number 4 is Lieutenant J.Z. van Niekerk. Number 7 is Captain J.H. Gloy. And if you turn to the following page, 138, and the succeeding pages, there's a number of complainants complaining about assault. So, for example, Albert Kwesi, on top of page 138, says that he was arrested on the 10th of February 1971. He was taken separately to a soundproof office where he was questioned at Caledon Square. He sat on a chair and was pushed off and fell onto the floor. He was told to sit on an imaginary chair for quite a time until he fell down. When he recovered, he had to repeat sitting in that way. He was also slapped in the face. Hot water was poured onto his hands and shirt. Later, he was dragged to the lift and on his way to the cells. Halfway down the page is a summary of what a man by the name of R.C. Wilcox will say. And he says that on the 10th of March 1971, he was taken to Caledon Square for questioning by security policemen. He was made to sit on an imaginary chair until he fell down. This was repeated several times. He was made to stand with his toes on bricks and hold 2 bricks above his head while running on the spot. He was sworn at throughout the questioning. That at 5 p.m. on the same day, a young security policeman buttoned up his shirt and twisted his collar, causing him to choke. On the following page, 139 on the top, a name, I can't read the initials, but the surname is spelt V-E-N-K-A-T-R-A-T-H-M-A-N. And he says he was arrested on the 17th of February 1971. He was questioned and made to stand against a wall with his hands held above his head. When his hands sagged, they were pushed up again. He was later made to hold books above his head. He was kicked on the legs and punched. His arms were twisted by Lieutenant van Wyk. He eventually made a statement. He was again questioned, and he was again made to stand against the wall holding books above his head. He was hit with the handle of a feather duster on the head and shoulders. He broke down and made a statement. He was brought to Pietermaritzburg on the 7th of June 1971. He was questioned by the security police there. He was punched and grabbed by his testicles by an unknown white security officer. Halfway down the page is Pandiso Zimambani. And he was at Lusikisiki, and he was arrested on the 6th of December 1970 by the security police. That he was questioned and then hit with sticks on his buttocks by unknown whites. That one Dreyer was present, but he did not assault him. That he was tied to a tree, blindfolded. That some object was placed on his ears, penis and legs, and then there was electric shocks, and that it was very painful. That they kept on questioning him, and he later made a statement to a white person. That he was tied to a tree for 4 days, and only released when he had his meals or to be questioned. After Christmas 1970, he was again questioned and shot. Then he was transferred to Pietermaritzburg, where he complained and was examined by a doctor. That he can only say that Captain van Niekerk, that's our Captain van Niekerk, assaulted him with a stick and does not know who applied the electric shocks. Over the page, the second paragraph, CA7, count 5, Mugami Mung will state that he is at present awaiting trial prisoner and that he was arrested by the security police in Johannesburg on the 20th of January 1971. That he was taken to Meadowlands police station and was questioned by Captain van Niekerk and Gloy, and that Captain van Niekerk slapped him in his face. That he was taken to Pretoria and questioned and was again slapped in the face by Captain van Niekerk. That Captain van Niekerk placed office pins and pebbles in his shoes. That he later made a statement to the security police. The next paragraph, at the last sentence, during the night he was assaulted by 2 Bantu security men until they were stopped by Captain van Niekerk. That on Tuesday he was again handcuffed and made to stand the whole day and the whole night. We then go to the bottom of the page, and it's Mr. Kader Hassan will say that he is presently awaiting trial prisoner, that on the 17th of February 1971 he was arrested by Major Squin and detained at Greytown. That he was questioned during the whole night and not allowed to sit. Then he asked Lieutenant Els for water, but this was refused. That he was continually questioned during the night. That he was threatened. I can't make it out.
What were the nature of these hearings?
I beg your pardon.
Were these internal hearings, or was it a case before court?
This is what is known as a pre-C. So where a person makes a complaint against the police, a criminal complaint, and it's investigated, at the end of the investigation, the investigating officer is required to draw up a pre-C. And this is the pre-C, a summary of the case.
Yeah.
It goes onto the front of the docket and is sent to the Attorney General to assist the Attorney General to read the matter. Do you want me to continue?
There's quite a number of them. I think they are in there.
Your Lordship, I've actually been taking, as you can see, this is a very substantial document, and I have been paging forward.
Yes.
And I think what we would need to do is study this document in more detail, because there's certainly more allegations coming up.
Yes.
And perhaps what we need to do is compile them in a discrete document for your Lordship. But I think that the witness has probably read sufficient at this time.
Yes. Yes. I have the document. All that remains is for counsel to draw my attention to areas which I must focus on. I'm not sure whether I'll be able to go through the entire document, but it's important that I be guided by counsel on what is relevant to the people who are involved in this particular case.
As the court pleases.
Yes.
Mr. Dutton, can I check? Is there anything else?
There's one more point I think I need to bring to the attention of the court. On page 75 of this file, this is a matter which occurred on the 29th of June 1959. And I haven't read the whole thing. I haven't had time. But this is a death of a person. Somebody died. So we need to look at that one too.
Mr. Dutton, thanks for drawing that to our attention. We're going to have to get to grips with this very substantial document that runs to probably several hundred pages, more than 300 pages. Your Lordship, I have no further questions for this witness.
Thank you. Okay, to this.
Jonathan, you've given comprehensive evidence. I just want to know, were you involved with the Motherwell investigation?
Yes, I was.
Did that involve a cover-up?
Yes, it did.
Was it security police?
It was the security police.
Thank you, my lord.
Before you question, can you enlighten us on just this piece of evidence that we're talking about? Give a brief account of what we've just talked regarding the Motherwell case.
In the Motherwell case?
Yes.
My Lord, the Motherwell case involved the placing of a bomb under a motor car, in the correct case. The white security officers had become disillusioned for some reason with a few of the black security officers. I've heard different accounts as to what that disillusionment was about. The one account is that, as we heard Paul Erasmus testify, checks were coming into the post office in Port Elizabeth, and they managed to change or open up a bank account. The security police managed to open up a bank account similar to the name that the checks were meant for. And they would just make a small alteration on the check and then deposit all these checks into that bank account, and they would misappropriate the money. And there was a dispute between the black members and the white members because the black members felt that they weren't getting sufficient share of the money. That's the one story I've heard. The other is that the security police mistrusted or came to mistrust these particular black security branch policemen. They arranged for a explosive expert to come down to PE, and he placed a bomb under the car. And then these black security branch members were sent on a trip, and somebody was waiting with a detonating device, and when they went past, they detonated and killed them all.
How many were killed?
I can't remember. I think it was 4, my lord,
Yeah.
but I'm not absolutely certain.
And what happened thereafter? Did they attempt to cover it up? In what way?
Well, they covered it up in the way that it was alleged that the ANC had killed security branch members.
I see. Okay, thank
You
you.
were the main investigator on that
Yes.
case. Thank you, my lord.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Kutsi.
Thank you. I'm not even going to try and defend the indefensible here. I hear your evidence and I take heart to it. But there are certain questions that I need to ask you, sir. And the one issue you raised was that one would have expected impartial oversight in the investigation in regards to Mr. Timol's death. Now, in 1971, and bearing in mind the involvement of the security branch,
Yes.
was there ever a possibility in the climate it was then for independent oversight in relation to anything done by the security branch?
The point why I say that is that if if Mr. Timol had in fact committed suicide, as was alleged, they could have had an impartial and open investigation to prove that, so that the evidence would show without any doubt that Mr. Timol had committed suicide. And so that is why the impartial oversight would have been so important, and they could have done it if they'd wanted to. And this is why I maintain, amongst other reasons, that there was a cover-up, because they didn't want to do it, they couldn't do it.
My question is more with regard to the structure and in the way that, and as you have testified, the way in which the security branch operated in that stage. The powers that be, would they have ever allowed any aspect of the security branch to be investigated by an independent source?
Sir, I investigated them.
Not in 1971.
No, not in 71. But 1985, nothing much had changed.
And what I'm getting at, sir, is, at least it's not criticism or anything like that. What I'm getting at is that the way, and the evidence that you have now testified to, and what we've heard here, that was almost common practice within the security branch. Especially if one have a look at what you have referred to the issues by Eugene de Kock and the other members that have that came out in basically uncovering what was happening in the security branch. This is almost a trend, if I can say that, within the security branch, the way what you have testified.
Yes, that is correct. I would say that probably in the 1960s and the 1970s, we weren't aware of that trend, but as the years went on and matters started to be exposed, that trend became apparent. And, you know, security branch commanders appeared, and I include General van der Merwe, and I include Minister Vlok, and I include people like Brigadier Skoon that we read about just now. And these people appeared before the Truth Commission, and they claimed that they were forced to act outside the law. They admitted that because of the circumstances of the country. But that reason doesn't stand up to scrutiny, because many people were arrested. Many ANC, let's call them terrorists, were arrested. And when they appeared before the high courts and the Supreme Courts in South Africa, they asked to be treated as prisoners of war in terms of the Geneva Convention. Invariably, the state, not invariably, in all the cases, the state successfully opposed that and said that there wasn't a state of war. So there is a contradiction between what was said to the Truth Commission and what has been said to many Supreme Courts.
Especially in the evidence that you have referred to here later on in page 136 and further of J2, it seemed to me that senior officers, and I believe a captain upwards, they are referred to as senior officers, if my memory serves me, were involved with a lot of these direct actions with suspects as they were then classified. Yes.
I would say very definitely, and in some cases even more senior people. And we've heard Paul Erasmus talk about the bombing of Kotsu House, where very senior generals were involved, and the minister.
If the standard of forensic investigation in 1971 is obviously, and I don't think that can ever be doubted, a far cry from what it is today. But at that stage, the scene preservation, and specifically the crime scene preservation where a person has died, can you perhaps just enlighten as to what was procedure? Apart now from what you have said, and I take note of what you have said with regard to retaining the position, was there forensic investigators to sweep for blood trace and trace material and that aspects. Were that available in 1971?
Yes, very definitely.
I think
We in fact had a very large and very good forensic section, policing section. The headquarters was in Pretoria, and these forensic experts could fly or come down to crime scenes. But locally in the cities, each city had what was known as a local fingerprint office, and they had forensic specialists there as well. And this was the case certainly in 1971.
And do I understand you, Ernest, correct, that there was no, or there's no record of, for example, fingerprints being lifted off the window in room 1026?
We only have the evidence of Brigadier Patel about that, but I don't know. There's certainly no evidence that Timol's fingerprints were found on the window.
So when you come to confidential sources and undercover police officers and all those cloak and dagger stuff, are there files for these CSs or for these undercover operations?
There's different levels, or they operated with different levels. But in the case of Mr. X, in the Timol case, he was described as being a security policeman. So there wouldn't have been a special file for him.
At that stage, did they need the approval from the Attorney General to do undercover work where they might implicate themselves?
I'm not certain.
So, and on, with regard to your investigation of the 9th and the 10th floor at John Foster Square, as it then was in 1971, was there or were there any specific holding cells on those floors for the security branch, or were they using the normal holding cells in the building?
That's an important point, and I'll tell you why. Mr. Timol and Mr. Aesop a detention order was issued for both of them. And both detention orders specified that they had to be held in the police cells at John Foster Square. That didn't happen. They were held, in my view, illegally in the offices on the 10th floor. And if one examines the reason for that, one can only come to the conclusion it was for reasons of torture and it was reasons of sleep deprivation. Because instead of putting 2 guards at night, as Gloria and Van Niekerk say they did, to guard the prisoner and slept on a mattress, they could quite easily have just taken him down a couple of stories and lodged him in the police cells, and it would have been a very easy way to deal with it. But the reason they couldn't do that is because they were beating these men. And they knew that if they took them to the cells, the person in charge of the cells would see their injuries. And it was practice as well that at least once a day, an officer had to visit the cells. And he would see the injuries, and he may even have ordered that these people be taken to the doctor. And I'm not saying that was a foolproof system. It was far from a foolproof system. But it created an element of risk for them. So they kept them on the 5th floor. On the cells as well, every time they took them out, there would be an occurrence book entry. What time they went out, what time they came back, did they have any injuries? And that's why they were kept on the 5th floor and not the cells.
10th floor. 5th floor. Yes. Is it 5th or 10th floor?
On the 10th floor.
10th floor. That's where they were kept.
That is where they were kept.
And then where are the cells located?
I beg your pardon?
Where are the cells located?
The cells, I think, are on the 3rd floor.
3rd floor. And these are being managed by the uniform branch of the police, or is it the detective branch?
The partially managed by the uniform branch and partially managed by the security branch.
Is that the cell?
That's the cells.
So, your evidence, as I understand it, is that Rodriguez was, in fact, an administrative person within the security branch.
Yes.
Now, within your experience and your investigation, with such a person, with an administrative person who deals with the salaries and with those administrative, would they be involved in the operational side of the security branch?
Generally not. But in this particular case, it may have happened. And I'll tell you why. Because the security branch at John Foster Square, in this Timol case, over 2 or 3 days, they had arrested, I'm not sure of the exact number, but several detainees. And they were depriving them all of their sleep. Now, if you're going to deprive a person of his sleep for 24 hours, over a 24-hour period, you need a rather large team to do that. And if you've got 7 or 8 detainees, the team, of course, has to be a lot larger. And it's done on a rotational basis, so you can imagine that if you multiply that by 5 days, you've got a very big staff. So I believe what would happen in those cases, and this is in fact what Paul Erasmus testified to yesterday, everybody is called in to assist with the sleep deprivation. So it is possible that they would have called in somebody like Rodriguez as well, even though he wasn't a man experienced in field work, but he could perform guarding duties.
Do you know what was the posting and position of Warrant Officer Else, Level Else?
What
was his posting in the security branch?
I don't. He was one of the investigators, or one of the interrogators, let me put it that way, of Professor Nack. Now we know that because we obtained the detention file of Professor Nack from the Department of Justice, who are the custodians of those files. And Professor Nack had complained to a visiting magistrate. And that's another point. There were visiting magistrates. And that's why they had to keep them on the 5th floor, so the magistrate couldn't see them.
On the 10th floor.
On the 10th floor, sorry. To come back to Professor Nack. In his detention file, he complained to the visiting magistrate that he had been assaulted. The type of assault that Professor Foster demonstrated this morning, with your arms being and a broomstick stuck. And he was hanged like that for a considerable period. We're not certain how long. He can't remember too clearly. And as a result, he lost the use of both his arms. And his complaint to the magistrate resulted in a criminal case being opened. The investigator in that case was a person from, I forget the police station, but he took statements from every policeman that came into contact with Professor Nack. And there were, I think, 26 of them, or 23 of them. To show you, demonstrate the size of the teams that worked with a single suspect. Now, in the Timol case, very few policemen identified themselves as being involved in that interrogation. Sorry, the point I need to make is that Warrant Officer Else was named as one of the people, and a statement was taken from him as one of the interrogators of Professor Nack.
That has been referred to as the A16 statement previously.
Yeah.
And without justifying it, and please do not understand, I do not try and justify any of the actions. The hierarchy within the security branch, in the rank structure, and within the police at that stage, within those branches, what would have been the result of defiance? What would have, if you defied orders, or if you refused to partake in any way in any of these actions which you have described, what would have been the result thereof for a police officer?
As a police officer, you're not required to carry out illegal instructions. So if somebody told me as a policeman, no matter who he was, whether he was the commissioner or a security police officer or whoever, and if he told me to hang somebody in a similar way to Nike, I would have said no.
Granted, and that is the correct answer, obviously. But within the culture that there was in the security branches, and I'm not trying to elicit psychological evidence, mass psychosis of the unity of a branch like that, and it is a fellowship, it is a brothership. I have heard that it was being referred to there in other matters within the security branch.
Well, let me explain to you. The South African police was divided into 3 branches. One was the uniform branch, which was by far the largest. The other was the detective branch, and the other was the security police. The security police were there to maintain the internal security of the country. Okay. Now, if that culture developed in the security police, it was because of bad leadership. And it should never have developed. And it should never have been tolerated. And it should never be made light of. What these people did was criminal.
But then, Mr. Dutton, I think what council wants to get from you is that given the nature of the work that they were doing, and the circumstances and environment which prevailed at that time, would it have been possible for a junior official within that unit of the security police to break rank and defy an order or the way in which they operated?
My lord, it was possible. He might not have remained in the security branch if he broke rank like that. But it was possible. It was up to the individual to decide whether he wanted to do these acts or not.
Yes, that would be the ideal situation. But now, are you saying to me that his removal from the security branch would be the kind of consequence that would follow? And would that be the only consequence? Taking into account the fact that he had knowledge of some of the activities which were clearly illegal, would he have being allowed to say, okay, fine, go to the detective branch or something?
Well, you're quite right about that, my lord, because of the Motherwell bombing, which shows that the consequences could be very severe.
Yes.
That was what I was going with the question. Thank you, Lord. So apart from the police officers that broke rank, and I'm talking about Erasmus and the people you referred to, which happened here at the end, late 80s, early 90s, thereabouts, that it happened. Before that time, before that became disclosed, to your knowledge, were there any of the security branch officers that in fact broke rank and in fact turned against their fellow security branch officers?
Yes, there were, and they might not have done it openly, but people asked for transfers from the security branch back to the uniform branch or back to the detective branch. And there were a number of these people, but they didn't break ranks. They did it in a way that would be compatible, that wouldn't put them at risk.
I understand what you say. Thank you, Lord. I've got no further questions.
Thank you. Mr. Van, ask you a follow-up question.
Lordship, just one. I also wish to seek some clarity from Mr. Dutton in relation to the culture of the security branch. My learned friend has spoken about the brothership that existed amongst security policemen. And you've mentioned that it was quite difficult to break ranks, although there were some exceptions to the rule. But would you agree that by and large the rule was that security branch members stuck together and hardly ever broke ranks?
Yes, because of the acts that they were committing, they had to stick together.
And of course, one always hears about the golden rule of policing, which is, I'm not a policeman, but police don't tell on each other. Did that exist at the time? Or was there such a culture?
To some extent, there was that type of culture, and that culture definitely existed within the security police. In the other branches, it might not have been so strong.
Yes. But let's focus on the security branch, because I want to put it to you that because of this brothership, this camaraderie, this bond that existed between security police officers, that made covering up so much more possible, that made covering up quite viable.
Yes, it did, as well as other factors. John Foster Square, for example, a member of the public can't wander into those offices. There's gates and bars. Whereas at a police station, members of the public visit the police stations all the time. So these conditions, these secret conditions and the camaraderie made covering up very easy.
Thank you, Lordship. No further questions.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Dutton. Yes, thank you for your evidence. Mr. Vani, where are we now?
Your Lordship, we have no further witnesses for today. In respect of tomorrow, it looks like we just have one witness,
Yes.
which is Mr. Mudley, who's going to provide the court with expert evidence on the question of trajectories. We have been pushing him to finalise his report, and I'm hoping that it will be finalised today, and we will distribute it before he gives evidence tomorrow.
You're hoping to distribute it today still?
Let me take instructions on that. My Lord, my attorneys advise me that it'll be distributed tomorrow morning.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. We'll adjourn until tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock.
May I just refer back to the issue that
sorry.
we stood down earlier on, just after the lunch break, my Lord? This is the matter of the service of the Sakuna on Mr. Adam Ahmed. Lord, I have here an affidavit by Brigadier Chabalala, who tried to affect the service on Mr. Ahmed, Adam Ahmed, which indicates that he could not serve it on him, and it appears as if he is avoiding service in this regard. And we could not, and currently he cannot be traced.
Let me see the affidavit. Is Brigadier Chabalala here?
No, I do not think he's here currently.
I think he's on too.
So just take my flag off, please. Just take the flag off, please.
Can you arrange that to be here tomorrow morning? Let's go into this.
My Lord, I will have to inquire from members of the police service department. He will be here tomorrow morning, my Lord.
Please,
He will be here.
because we'd like to get to this, and I need to hear the other members before I can proceed on this matter.
As the court says.
Yes, we'll adjourn then until tomorrow, 10 o'clock.
I've told the police they must not expect me to defend the individual. I can't and I won't.
And quite right, that brotherhood made it very difficult for anybody to come forward. And those who did come forward,
Of course, they would have been ostracized. Even today, you know, that brotherhood of man, that kind of bond, I don't know. Well, let me not say anything further than that.
yeah.
Vamos